I wanted to eat really good food, the kind of good flavors that I was used to. And so I taught myself to cook and to get those meaty, smoky, delicious, soulful flavors into my cooking.
The intake of legumes, which are beans and split peas and chickpeas and lentils, is probably the most important dietary predictor of survival in older persons around the world. 8% decrease in premature death risk for each daily ounce intake.
We should include nuts in our diet just as we should include beans. They're loaded with fiber, they're loaded with antioxidants, they're loaded with phytonutrients, packed with protein.
It's not all or nothing. It's not black or white. Any movement we can make along this spectrum towards eating healthier can accrue significant benefits. The most important thing is to eat real food that grows from the ground.
We've known for decades that plant-based foods are healthiest.
The reason people don't eat more vegetables is they just don't realize how powerful they are.
Every vegetable is delicious. Real cooking is about taking a vegetable like a Brussels sprout or a maitake mushroom and making them so incredibly delicious that you realize that cooking is all about flavor.
Food is an intrinsic part of human existence. We come together around food, celebrate around food, and build traditions around food. Despite its fundamental role, our diet is one of the most worrisome aspects of modern life. But after decades of research, there's hope that we may finally know how to change that.
The leading causes of death and disability are largely chronic diseases now, but 80% is completely diet and lifestyle. It's what we expose ourselves to, what we put in our mouth, both cigarettes and food, whether we're exercising. These are the critical components, and that's good news. I mean, that means we have tremendous power over our health, destiny, and longevity. The vast majority of premature death and disability is preventable with a healthy enough diet and other lifestyle behaviors. Medicine is excellent. We have got antibiotics, we can put you in a cast, we can take you to emergency surgery, we can slow down your diabetic blindness and kidney failure and amputations with drugs, with insulin injections. Unfortunately, none of these are actually treating the cause of the disease.
Today, mounting evidence points to a plant-based diet, meaning food that grows from the ground, as the best way to prevent, treat, and reverse chronic illnesses. Dr. Michael Greger is an author and world-renowned public health expert who's been highlighting the life-changing power of plants. He and his team review thousands of medical studies each year and distill them into practical advice for his website, nutritionfacts.org. One of the most comprehensive studies on health and eating habits was the 2005 China study by Dr. T. Colin Campbell, a landmark report that found significantly lower rates of chronic illness throughout rural China, where people largely survived on plant-based diets.
There are populations around the world that don't suffer from our epidemics of heart disease and type 2 diabetes and obesity. So if you take someone living in Japan, for example, which has the longest life expectancy, and they move to the US and start eating and living like the US, they get US diseases. And similarly, if someone moves to Japan from the United States, and start eating and living like the Japanese, their rates of these chronic diseases plummets, because these are lifestyle diseases.
Evidence goes as far back as the 1920s, when researchers uncovered a surprising correlation between plant-based diets and blood pressure levels in East Africa.
They took the blood pressures of 1,000 people living in rural Kenya. They ate a plant-based diet centered around fruits, vegetables, beans, whole grains, wild greens, and their blood pressures actually go down as they get older, whereas our blood pressures in the Western world go up. Same thing in rural China. 70-year-olds, same average blood pressure as 16-year-olds. We're talking 110/70 their entire lives. Ideal blood pressures. Vastly different diets, but what they shared in common is that they're plant-based day to day, with meat only eaten on special occasions. In the Western world, the only population getting it down that low, 110/70, were those eating strictly plant-based diets.
A re-evaluation of the modern diet is underway. Health experts, food advocates, restaurateurs, and the average consumer are taking a closer look at what we put in our bodies. Yet, even with increasing scientific information available, our dependence on highly processed foods and animal products is a hard habit to break.
The only reason that people are not eating more plant-based foods is that the food industry has done a fantastic job with marketing and advertising. 70% of the food industry marketing is for processed foods, refined foods, and junk foods. Those are the foods that Americans eat the most. The food industry is the largest industry in the country. Food is very intimate, food is very emotional, food is very personal, food is very social.
Chef Rich Landau has been paving the way for a veggie renaissance from his kitchen at Veg, a renowned plant-based restaurant thriving in the heart of Center City, Philadelphia, the cheesesteak capital of the world.
Give people great food, and they'll never look at what's not on the plate. We're wired to think that we need meat to enjoy our meal. That's really just not the case. It's about the flavor. It's about what chefs and cooks do to meat that makes it taste so good, not about the meat itself. They are loaded with flavor and nutrition. Real cooking is about taking a vegetable like a Brussels sprout or a maitake mushroom or a carrot and making them so incredibly delicious that you realize that cooking is all about flavor. It's all about the preparation. How do you put a carrot in the center of the plate and convince people that this is worthy of being the focus of the plate? The carrot itself is absolutely delicious when cooked properly, and the texture of it is just hitting it home because it's so beautifully and perfectly cooked. So now you've convinced people that are used to seeing carrots only as pureed in a soup or raw in a salad that this is worthy of like knife and fork food.
Statistics show that most people rarely consume the minimum amount of recommended fruits and vegetables each day. And their continued reliance on processed foods has many experts pushing for a complete rethink of the nutritional advice we've been given for the last half-century.
The reason people don't eat more vegetables is they just don't realize how powerful they are. I mean, we have this kind of resonating, eat your greens, but what's the science behind it?
We've known for decades that plant-based foods are healthiest, and it's pretty straightforward. Plant-based foods have fiber. Animal-based foods do not. Fiber is essential for preventing chronic disease and promoting health. And most plant-based foods are high in vitamins and minerals, antioxidants, phytonutrients. They're the foods that promote health, that help clear our arteries, help us maintain a normal blood sugar level, help prevent heart disease, help prevent obesity and overweight.
the most important thing is to eat real food that grows from the ground. Dark green leafy vegetables are the healthiest vegetables. In fact, the healthiest food, period, with a greater nutrient density than anything else we can put in our mouth, translating to about a 20% drop in stroke and heart attack risk for each daily serving of greens.
Capitalizing on the growing interest for nutritious options, many chefs have been working hard to redefine our relationship with food. Their goal: to create intensely satisfying, crave-worthy combinations that win out over less healthy, processed, and animal-based options.
It's all about kind of changing, your perception of what you're expecting and what you're actually getting. How do you just rewire their brains as to what vegetables are capable of? Every vegetable is delicious. They're not a side dish. They're not torn up little bits in this chopped up little stir fry. Their main focus is on the plate. Let's take Swiss chard, for example. Something that people see as traditionally very chewy, a little too leafy for most palates. Swiss chard, like most greens, has to be blanched first. A boiling pot of water with a little salt in it. The greens go in and they come right out. 10 seconds. That's all you really need. That basically sets their color and texture and tenderizes them. The next thing you want to do is just saute them very gently with a little bit of garlic and olive oil in a pan with some salt and pepper. The trick with the greens is getting them cooked to perfection. If they're undercooked, they're going to be a big, chewy, chlorophyll-laden mess that you're just going to be like chewing like a horse at the table. And you're just trying to get through this. It's saying to yourself, it's healthy, it's healthy, it's healthy. Well, that's not how you should be eating your greens. The greens are actually delicious.
In addition to dark leafy greens, research has shown that a high intake of cruciferous vegetables like cabbage and broccoli can reduce prostate cancer progression, stop the spread of metastatic cancer, and prevent DNA damage. One recent study comparing smokers with a high intake of broccoli to smokers eating no broccoli at all found 30% less DNA damage in the broccoli eating group.
The reason broccoli is so good for us is that any of those cruciferous vegetables, whether we're talking about cabbage, broccoli, collard greens, kale, have these class of compounds called glucosidylates. What they do is they boost your liver's detoxifying enzyme systems. So basically all the blood, before it goes to your body, from your digestive tract, first goes through the liver. The liver's like the body's bouncer. Keeps out any toxins, detoxifies any carcinogens, and then lets the blood flow to the rest of the body. And so that's why it's so critical to eat cruciferous vegetables every single day, because it so boosts your liver's ability to detoxify the carcinogens and pollutants from our environment.
I absolutely love broccoli. It probably is my favorite vegetable. We blanch it first, and then we char grill it. And broccoli takes on this great smoky flavor when you grill it. The florets get charred up, the stem gets these beautiful grill marks on them. And then we float this in a shiitake dashi, which is a Japanese broth, usually made with fish, that we make with shiitake mushrooms and seaweed. And the effect is just so beautiful, very smoky, very rich, and also very, very meaty and satisfying.
While dark leafy greens and cruciferous vegetables boast the biggest nutritional bang for the buck, diversifying our vegetable consumption is essential for our overall health. According to the Global Burden of Disease Study, inadequate vegetable intake is a leading dietary risk factor for chronic diseases, comparable in harm to the consumption of processed meats.
We should really eat the rainbow when it comes to choosing our vegetables, because many of the anti-aging, anti-cancer, antioxidants are the plant pigments themselves. So, for example, the beta-carotene, which makes carrots and sweet potatoes and cantaloupes orange, or lycopene, the red pigment in tomatoes, the same kind of chemical nature of the pigment compounds that reflects that gorgeous color is the same antioxidant properties that can be so helpful within the body.
Eating a diverse plant-based diet raises our exposure to essential nutrients like vitamin C, found not only in citrusy fruits, but in vegetables like peppers and sweet potatoes. Experts say there may be more than 30,000 different phytonutrients, with a long list of health benefits that are still being discovered. And they're not just found in the most colorful fruits and vegetables. Some of the most potent nutrients are packed in nature's palest packages, including cauliflower, onions, garlic, and mushrooms. There are over 2,000 varieties of edible mushrooms, and research has shown they are one of the most powerful foods for boosting our immune system, reducing inflammation, and preventing cancer.
Just like there are unique anti-cancer compounds specific to the cruciferous vegetable family, there are these beneficial compounds found in mushrooms like ergothioneine, which is an antioxidant amino acid found basically only in the mushroom kingdom, meaning if we don't eat mushrooms, we don't get it into our diet. It's found particularly in our retinal tissue and reproductive tissues. It's basically housed in very sensitive tissues in the body because it has such a cytoprotective or cell protective effect. Eating just plain white button mushrooms can so boost our immune function it can significantly decrease our risk of common respiratory infections like the common cold.
For chefs like Rich Landau, the incredible variety and richness of mushrooms provides a tremendous opportunity to change people's perceptions of often overlooked foods.
I mean, they're just incredible. They're good for you. They're meaty. They're just delicious. We love really, really big cuts of mushroom, like a maitake or portobello, that can stand on their own in the middle of the plate. And again, it's about that knife and fork satisfaction when you're cutting through it. We have another mushroom that we import from Italy called the nebradini. And they're these medium-sized white mushrooms with this very, very silky flesh to them. So we shave these very, very thin, and we cook them in like this tomato basil sauce. And we call it nebradini mushrooms as fazzoletti. And fazzoletti are just, little handkerchief pieces of pasta, little tiny squares of pasta swimming in a broth or sauce. So we're actually using the mushrooms to be the pasta, and that's exactly how it eats. And it's just beautiful what you can do with mushrooms in that sense, because they're so adaptable. They can kind of do what you want them to do, but you also have to listen to what they really are and respect their qualities.
While the rising tide of health problems might seem like an uphill battle, significant progress continues to be made as plant-based foods make their way from farms to our tables. Research, preventive medicine, and awareness all play critical roles when it comes to our health. But the decisions we make on a daily basis continue to be the biggest factor.
It doesn't matter what you eat on your birthday, or special occasions, or on holidays. It's really the day-to-day stuff that adds up. And on a day-to-day basis, the more we can center our diets around whole, healthy plant foods, real food that grows out of the ground, the healthier we will be long-term.
What I encourage people to do basically is just start where they are and add. If you can get a third to a half of your plate to be vegetables, then the other half you want to be whole grains and beans.
I knew that food was linked to your own health, but I also knew that food was delicious and it made you feel good and it helped you celebrate things with your family.
People that consume whole grains tend to live significantly longer, have lower rates of heart disease, diabetes, stroke, obesity.
I found that people enjoyed good food, and it really doesn't matter what's on the plate as long as it's good. If you can make a meat-free meal better than a meal that has meat, I don't think people really care that much.
Grains have provided the foundation for human existence since the dawn of civilization. African societies have been nourished by sorghum and millet. Asian cultures by buckwheat and rice. Even the ancient Aztecs revered the flowering perennial amaranth for its supernatural powers, worthy of the gods. Today, grains remain a cornerstone of our diet around the world, and a closer examination is revealing surprising implications for our health.
Whole grains are essential to the diet. They are actually the cornerstone of a healthy, whole food, plant-based diet. Whole grains are where you get your complex carbohydrates in particular. So they're loaded with fiber, they're loaded with protein. You can get at least 10% of your daily protein needs from whole grains like quinoa, millet, oats, and bulgur.
People that consume whole grains tend to live significantly longer, have lower rates of heart disease, diabetes, stroke, obesity. We did interventional trials where you split people up into two groups, and half you make eat oatmeal for a couple of weeks, and the other half continue the regular diet. And then you can see, oh, the only thing that we did differently was just adding the oatmeal, and then we can see what happens. And with those kind of studies, you can show that adding whole grains to people's diets can significantly lower blood pressure, help control blood sugars, and help control cholesterol. These are critical risk factors for some of our deadliest diseases, such as heart disease.
While a vast majority of people understand the impact of their dietary habits, modern food choices can be difficult to navigate. Over the last century, dramatic advances in industrial farming and food manufacturing have produced a flood of convenient, cheap, and tasty processed foods. Today, roughly 60% of the calories consumed in the U.S. come from heavily processed food products that often include refined grains, a major dietary shift that's having a profound impact on public health.
There's chemicals in this food that you can't even read the ingredients on the label. You can't understand some of these ingredients. These are usually cheap foods, they're not very nutritious, and they're making our kids fat and unhealthy. They're malnourished, so they're bulking up on all this carb and cheap, kind of soy-enhanced product, yet they're not getting any nutrition. And that's what's leading to some of the health problems in our country.
The number one cause of death in the United States is our diet. 97% of Americans eat fiber-deficient diets, don't even reach the recommended minimum daily intake of fiber. 98% of Americans don't get enough potassium or eating potassium-deficient diets. Why? Because they're not eating enough plants.
For experts, the health consequences of the modern diet are worrisome. Recent data from the American Heart Association places strokes as one of the leading causes of death around the world, with over 17 million casualties each year. By 2030, this number is expected to surpass 23 million. These statistics hit close to home for Chef Kate Jacoby and prompted her, from a young age, to rethink the close ties between food and health.
My father had had heart disease ever since I knew him. He had had this major issue. When I was in 5th grade, he had had double bypass surgery. And I learned very early on how that was going to impact our home and what was in our cabinets and the foods that we would eat. I actually learned to make bran muffins for him because that was something that we were told would be great if he would eat more bran muffins. It would keep his cholesterol low. And I swear I could, blindfolded, one arm behind my back, make, 2 dozen bran muffins. And that was my signature thing.
Using her personal experience as a catalyst for positive change, Chef Jacoby has been crafting healthy yet delectable plates alongside Chef Rich Landau at Veg Restaurant in Center City, Philadelphia.
So So again, you're gonna need a lot of utensils with this. I see food as such a personal thing that, you grow up with what your family is, feeding you, and then your own personal habits. It's so personal that it can be very off-putting if somebody is like preaching to you. So, we never want to preach to people. We just want to sort of give an example of something that we feel is great for us. And if people think it's delicious, then that's great.
I found that people enjoyed good food, and it really doesn't matter what's on the plate as long as it's good. If you can make a meat-free meal better than a meal that has meat, I don't think people really care that much.
Experts have been touting the health benefits of plant-based foods for decades. Lower risks of chronic diseases have been associated with a higher intake of vegetables, whole grains, fruits, and legumes. One recent study found that eating just 3 servings of whole grains a day was just as effective at lowering blood pressure as some commonly prescribed medications. The resulting decrease could reduce the risk of having a heart attack by 15% and the risk of having a stroke by up to 25%.
What I encourage people to do basically is just start where they are and add. And if you think of a 9-inch plate, right, for lunch or for dinner, if you can get 1/3 to 1/2 of your plate to be vegetables, then the other half you want to be whole grains and beans. What we mean by whole grains as opposed to refined grains is that the whole grain actually still contains the fiber, the bran, and the germ. It has not been removed. They have not been processed out, and that's where all of the nutrients are.
The difference between whole grains and refined grains is they start with a whole grain like brown rice, whole wheat, and then they refine it. They remove the outer layers, and that's where most of the nutrition is. And so you start out with hundreds or thousands of phytonutrients in this, and you strip it down to just a few, and then by law, because it's so nutrient depleted, they actually have to add back, they have to spray some vitamins back on, so people don't start dying from things like beriberi, which is a vitamin B deficiency caused by the refining of brown rice to white rice. Killed lots of people until we realized, oh, that's what was happening. This was a nutrient deficiency disease induced by food processing.
When you read an ingredients label on a packaged item and it says enriched something. So enriched flour means that they've taken the bran, the germ, and the fiber out, and they've added maybe about 6 to 7 synthetic nutrients back in. When you're eating white bread, when you're eating white rice, when you're eating white pasta, it basically converts like sugar into your body, and it spikes the blood sugar level. People are concerned about sugar itself, but white flour products are very unhealthy foods to eat for that reason. They're very, very harmful, very dangerous, and they can actually shorten your life. There's absolutely no reason for people to eat any refined processed grains. They're that unhealthy.
I encourage people to not just go whole grains, that's a great step, but even better, do intact grains. Eat grains as we were meant to eat them, with just chewing them instead of putting them through a mill, and then it actually leaves bits and pieces behind for our good gut bacteria to eat, and it's actually absorbed very slowly, naturally into our body. So I'm talking about, oatmeal, quinoa. You can actually see the individual grains rather than flour products, something like pasta or bread.
Quinoa is an ancient crop traditionally consumed in the Andean region of South America that's quietly made its way out of health food stores into more mainstream supermarkets and restaurants. It was called the mother grain by the Incas and is widely considered a superfood given its high nutrient content and because it's loaded with fiber, vital minerals, protein, and antioxidants. But quinoa's greatest culinary asset might be its versatility.
One of the things we like to do the most is pair our food with each other. Think about what's sweet, what's spicy, what's creamy, what's savory, what's nutty, what's earthy in everything you're cooking, and find the perfect balance. So quinoa for me is very nutty. It's got this really wonderful, almost crunchy texture to it. Autumn squash is creamy and rich and sweet. They're a perfect match for each other. What we like to do is use delicata squash, which is a torpedo-shaped squash. It's got a light yellow flesh, and it's sweet and really, really creamy, full of just delicious flavor. We cut these down into rings and we scoop out the seeds and roast them in the oven with just a little bit of salt and pepper and a little bit of spice. Next thing, we take the quinoa and we cook that with just a little bit of, we like to call them Thanksgiving spices, a little bit of allspice, a touch of clove, a little bit of cumin, and finish it with a little bit of rosemary. And then we take our peppers, all sorts of different autumn peppers, and we saute them in a pan with a little bit of garlic and olive oil. And that little bit of heat you get from the peppers, combined with the nuttiness of the quinoa and the sweet creaminess of the squash, makes this incredibly perfect dish.
Unfortunately, in today's world, not all grains are created equal, and many of the ways we consume them are radically reducing their biggest benefits. While it's relatively easy to select different types of raw grains to cook, it can be challenging to sort out the myriad of whole grain claims advertised on many processed foods.
Even if it says whole grains in the ingredients list, they obviously highly process that to remove the fiber and remove much of the other nutrition, and so that's why you want to put that back on the shelf and stick to really intact whole grains as much as possible. But if you are going to buy a packaged whole grain product like bread or like breakfast cereal, I encourage people to stick to the 5-to-1 fiber rule, meaning you look at the nutrition facts label and you want to make sure that the amount of carbohydrates to fiber is 5-to-1 or less. So if you have something that says 15 grams of carbohydrates per serving, you want to make sure that there's 3 or more grams of fiber, so you get that 5-to-1 ratio. And that just gives you a sense of how little processing went on.
Gluten has become a major concern for many consumers of packaged grain products in the past few years. Yet, research has shown that for the vast majority of people, those concerns are largely unwarranted and could actually be detrimental to their health.
There's some people that need to avoid gluten, which is a protein found in certain types of grains. For those people, they need to go on completely gluten-free diets their entire lives. That's less than 1% of people. And then maybe about another 1% have what's called non-celiac gluten sensitivity, meaning they don't have celiac disease, but do seem to experience gastrointestinal symptoms like chronic diarrhea when they eat gluten-containing grains. And so for maybe 2% of the population may want to stay away from gluten, but for 98% of people, right, for the other 49 out of 50 people, then gluten is a health-promoting plant protein, just like other health-promoting plant proteins. It should not be avoided.
Today, it's easier than ever to incorporate a wide range of grains from around the world into your diet and transform them into a sumptuous foundation for virtually any meal.
Grains can be really, really delicious if you cook them right. And the big secret is that they're very, very easy to cook. Grains are easy because most of it is hands-off. You can get something as simple as a rice cooker and cook some really great rices in there. They're delicious and they're so good for you, and it takes literally the click of a button in a rice cooker to cook them. And the beauty of it is you can salt it early and you can put any kind of seasonings in there. Use saffron threads, some curry spice, some Moroccan tagine spice, some Caribbean jerk spice. Throw anything like that into your grains and let them cook, and they absorb it as they go. And without any work whatsoever, when that timer goes off, you have a beautiful pot of grains.
After thousands of years, grains remain the cornerstone of the human diet. They provide the foundation for much of what we eat and are a major source of many vital nutrients. With the emergence of more positive health studies, many experts hope for an even greater desire to move grains to the center of our plates as part of a broader shift toward healthier, plant-based diets.
We now know that some of our most common chronic diseases, such as high blood pressure and heart disease and type 2 diabetes, these diseases can only be prevented but arrested and reversed with a healthy enough diet and lifestyle.
We have to take control. We have to understand that really healthy plant-based foods are the best foods that we can eat, so we need to add more of them to our plate. And there's no shame in wanting to eat healthy food. There's no shame in wanting to be healthy. Everyone is not going to choose to eat plant-based foods, but everyone should have the right to the information so that they can make that choice. Fruits are the second healthiest foods on the planet after vegetables.
Imagine if there were a drug that could decrease your risk of dying by 1/3.
The best thing that I can do is to take a fruit and showcase it with as little meddling as possible.
You need to realize the important difference between sugar in its natural form, the way nature intended, versus these so-called industrial sugars.
We have to take control. Even if you are just able to do it once or twice or 3 times a week, that makes a huge impact on your health.
For millions of years, humans have been developing an important symbiotic relationship with fruit. Trees and plants depend on us to disperse seeds from their fruits across the countryside. And we have come to depend on those fruits for a delicious and vital source of nutrition. But new research is revealing that our relationship with fruit may run much deeper than we ever imagined.
According to the Global Burden of Disease Study, the largest study of human risk factors to date, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the #1 dietary risk factor for death and disease worldwide is not eating enough fruit.
Fruits are the second healthiest foods on the planet after vegetables. They're sweet, they're delicious, they're full of water, they are full of fiber, very high in phytonutrients and antioxidants, and those are basically cancer-fighting, health-promoting foods.
Humans are naturally drawn to fruit, especially ripe, sweet fruit, because we're primates, animals that evolved eating fruit in the trees. Monkeys and apes still spend much of their days searching for fruit and have been selected to prefer the ripe, sweet kind because it contains more sugar for energy and water, which can be hard to find high in the trees. That highly developed palate for sweets and the power they provide remains with us to this day.
We need fructose. We need naturally occurring fructose from fruit in our diet. Fructose is a component of complex carbohydrates. Our bodies run on that fuel. We need to eat that every day. That's the energy that we use to fuel our movements, to fuel our bodies to function. And so we have to get those complex carbs. That's the engine on which we run.
Unfortunately, the vast majority of fructose we consume today doesn't come from fruit. Food companies realized the powerful draw of sugar decades ago and have been adding large quantities of it to processed foods ever since. From breads and sauces to soft drinks, sugar has become a hidden core ingredient of most modern staples. And that refined sugar is missing several critical components that are essential to our health.
When we eat something like white table sugar, we're basically eating something that has been processed. It started out as a sugarcane salt, and it's been processed into white table sugar crystals. In that process, the fiber is removed and most of the nutrients are removed. And so you're basically eating empty calories. And that's the problem with sugar. So it's empty calories, it's very addictive, it's the #1 added ingredient to all processed and packaged foods. Americans eat about 30 tablespoons of sugar a day.
You need to realize the important difference between sugar in its natural form, the way our nature intended, versus these so-called industrial sugars. That sucrose, table sugar, and high fructose corn syrup have a very different effect on the body. So the reason we're concerned about sugar intake in general, this excess added sugar intake, is because pretty much liver health, high blood pressure, and high triglycerides, high fat in the blood from too much sugar intake. Well, fruit intake is associated with actually the reverse. The more fruit people eat, they actually have better liver health, they have better blood pressure, lower triglycerides. Diabetics on high fruit diets have better blood sugar control than diabetics with restricted fruit intake.
The consumption of added sugar has increased rapidly since the dawn of the industrial age, leading to an epidemic of obesity, cancer, and other serious illnesses. One recent study found that people who consumed roughly 20% of calories from added sugar had nearly 40% greater risk of dying from cardiovascular disease than those who consumed less than 8%. These stunning findings are leading many health experts to recommend major reductions in the amount of added sugar we consume from processed foods.
Ideally, World Health Organization is pushing for 5% added sugars a day. American Heart Association is at 10%. For some people, that wouldn't even allow a single can of soda a day. That's how concerned they are about added sugar intake, but they're not talking about fruit. In fact, they've done studies where they've given people dozens of servings of fruit a day, and we actually see just beneficial effects on their metabolism. So absolutely, we should stuff our face with as many fruits and vegetables as possible, but indeed eliminate or reduce on a day-to-day basis our consumption of added industrial sugars.
A 7-year study of more than 500,000 Chinese adults found that those who ate fruit regularly cut their risk of dying from cardiovascular disease by roughly 1/3. Even basic fruits, like oranges, provide critical phytochemicals, antioxidants, and fiber that boost our immune system and lower our blood pressure and glucose levels. But nutritionists are quick to point out that how you consume those fruits matters.
What I recommend is that people eat fruit as a whole food. That's the best way to eat it. So a whole apple instead of apple juice, a whole orange instead of orange juice. When you eat the whole fruit, you're getting the fiber. And so what the fiber does is help to make the fructose, the natural fruit sugar that's in the fruit, to enter your bloodstream slowly, and so it doesn't spike your blood sugar level. If you're just having fruit juice, you're not getting any fiber, it's gonna spike your blood sugar, and then you're gonna crash. It's actually very dangerous, especially for people who experience diabetes.
In recent years, scientists have uncovered many surprising health benefits in fruits, from fighting cancer to improving memory. And while food and nutrition companies often tout the latest benefits found in relatively rare fruits, like barberries and goji berries, some of the most remarkable benefits have been found in some of the most ordinary fruits, including the ubiquitous apple.
I think we hear a lot about, exotic superfruits, when it turns out that apples, one of the most common fruits, are one of the most powerful fruits in terms of their health benefits. We've known for a while now there are these in vitro petri dish studies showing that the apple peels, most of the nutrition is actually in the peel, so we shouldn't peel our apples, can suppress cancer cell growth, human cancer cell growth. And most excitingly, a new study out of Australia followed about 1,500 women for a period of 15 years. These are older women, older than age 70, and those women that ate an apple a day or more had 35% lower risk of dying, period. Dying prematurely within that 15-year period compared to those that didn't eat apples at all, essentially. Imagine if there were a drug that could decrease your risk of dying by a third. That's extraordinary, and I think that's the kind of data that I think can inspire people to, go over to the produce aisle and see what new exciting varieties of apples might be in that week.
Chef Kate Jacoby builds on the natural sweetness of fruits like apples to create healthy yet indulgent desserts that can satisfy even the sweetest tooth. She and her husband, Chef Rich Landau, scour the globe for exotic flavors and techniques to try out in their vegan restaurant, Veg. For Jacoby, the biggest challenge and greatest reward is crafting the ultimate plant-based treat that indulges your senses as much as mainstream desserts.
And then, you can go ahead and just kind of like pop it open.
I love the idea of incorporating, fruits and vegetables, both really, into desserts and really kind of focusing on them and not just making them into a pie filling that's like covered with sugar, or like blending them into something and losing their texture. The best thing that I can do is to take a fruit at the peak of its ripe season, and showcase it with as little meddling as possible. Each year, we kind of revisit certain seasonal fruits because here in Philadelphia, we go through, obviously, a pretty predictable cycle. So when it comes to the time of year where everybody's looking for something like apple, we try to reinvent it sometimes. This year, we wanted to do something a little bit different, like a mini apple pie. We call it an apple blossom, so it does have a pastry crust, but then we take slices of apple and sort of layer them in almost to the point where they look like a rose. And so when we were working on this, it smelled delicious, like all of the beautiful baking spices with a little cinnamon and like a little touch of clove and a dash of allspice were all coming through so nicely. But again, about texture, we wanted just a little something extra in there. So we turned to walnuts to create that little mid texture, because you have like the juicy, soft baked apples, and then you have that crispy, kind of like just a little bit, tender crust. We wanted something in between, so we made a walnut frangipane to layer underneath. We've pulsed down the walnuts and created almost like a pastry cream to layer underneath. And in this application, the walnuts are so rich and luscious that they add a really nice, like, third texture. Around the dish, we have a pomegranate cider, using apple cider and pomegranate juice that we've reduced down with a little bit of apple cider vinegar. So we're trying to, again, create a really nice balanced dish that's gonna speak to the season and eat in a way that, you're basically getting like delicious apple pie, but you're also having the great texture between the creaminess from the walnut frangipane and then like the crunch of the sprinkled walnuts. We're going for like layers of flavor and layers of texture.
While the common apple remains one of the world's most popular fruits, research has shown that berries, like pomegranates, strawberries, and blueberries, may turn out to be the healthiest. Recent studies indicate they may be a hidden weapon in the battle against Alzheimer's disease. They've also been shown to be highly effective in combating cancer, heart disease, and even inflammation, a major source of many chronic diseases.
Berries are the healthiest fruits. Harvard researchers found that women who ate a single serving of blueberries a week or 2 servings of strawberries had slower rates of cognitive decline, slower rates of brain aging by as much as 2.5 years compared to those women that didn't eat berries. American Cancer Society study following 100,000 men and women found that those that ate berries had significantly lower risk of dying from cardiovascular disease.
I just recommend that people eat berries every single day. They are that healthy for you. They're the dark leafy greens of fruit. I'm talking about blueberries, blackberries. Those are the healthiest berries of them all. The darker the berry, the healthier the fruit.
Darker berries have more antioxidants, just like most darker fruits and vegetables. That means they can remove even more oxidizing agents from our bodies that cause significant damage to our cells over time. But experts say the most important factor in selecting the healthiest berries is to maintain variety and not forget about the many larger and sometimes less sweet types that scientists also classify in the berry family.
In addition to berries, in addition to bananas, in addition to apples, you also want to have tomatoes, you want to have cucumbers, you want to have avocados. Avocados are loaded with healthy fats. I recommend that people eat at least one avocado every day. So again, you want to have color. That's how you know that you're getting all of the nutrients that you need, the antioxidants, the phytonutrients. So you want to focus on adding the rainbow to your cart, just like you would with vegetables.
A growing body of research clearly indicates that eating a diverse, plant-based diet full of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes is one of the biggest steps that we can take toward improving our health. It may seem like an uphill battle because we're bombarded by many tempting and powerful choices that can lead us astray. But experts agree, it gets easier over time. And it's the small, everyday decisions that could ultimately end up saving our lives.
We have to take control. And I know that there are food deserts out there. I know that people don't always have access to fresh, healthy food. So you do what you can. You grow your own food. You shop at farmers markets. You join a community-supported agriculture, CSA. Knowing that whole grains are healthier, knowing that fruit is healthy, knowing that vegetables are healthy, knowing that beans, nuts, and seeds are healthy. You have to start somewhere, and every little bit helps. Even if you are just able to do it once or twice or 3 times a week, that makes a huge impact on your health.
We've been kind of swamped with this hyper salty, hyper sweet, hyper fatty palate because that's the processed food industry's way to kind of get us to use cheap ingredients to eat their garbage, basically. They add more salt, sugar, fat, just to kind of hijack our natural biological drives. But when we start going back to whole natural foods, at first, it's a transition in our taste. But give it a few weeks, start eating healthy, and all of a sudden, whole natural food actually tastes delicious. And so then you get the best of both worlds. It tastes great and you get to live longer. That's what plant-based eating is all about.